The sun hung low over the Texas plains like a dying ember, casting long shadows across Samuel Thompson's cattle ranch. The 42-year-old rancher wiped the sweat from his weathered brow as he secured the last gate of his corral. His herd of longhorns moved restlessly in the evening heat, their lowing mixing with the distant call of coyotes beginning their nightly hunt. Samuel had built this ranch from nothing over 15 years, transforming barren land into a thriving operation. His calloused hands spoke of countless hours, mending fences, birthing calves, and fighting off rustlers who thought they could take what wasn't theirs. The ranch house, modest but sturdy, sat on a slight rise overlooking the grazing lands that stretched toward the horizon. As twilight deepened, Samuel noticed something unusual near the creek that bordered his property. Two figures moved gracefully through the cottonwoods, their silhouettes barely visible in the fading light. His hand instinctively moved to the Colt revolver at his hip, a habit formed from years of living on the frontier where danger could emerge from anywhere at any time. The figures emerged from the trees, and Samuel's breath caught in his throat. Two young Apache women walked toward his ranch house with purposeful steps. Their traditional clothing was travel-worn but well-maintained, decorated with intricate beadwork that caught the last rays of sunlight. Both carried themselves with a dignity and strength that commanded respect, their dark eyes alert and intelligent. The taller of the two sisters appeared to be in her early 20s, with long black hair braided with small silver ornaments. Her companion, slightly younger, moved with the same fluid grace but carried herself with a watchful intensity that suggested she had seen too much of the world's harshness for her years. Samuel's mind raced as they approached. Relations between settlers and the Apache had been tense for years, with conflicts erupting sporadically across the territory. Many ranchers shot first and asked questions later when encountering Apache on their land. But something about these two women made Samuel hesitate. They walked openly, making no attempt at stealth, their hands visible and empty of weapons. The older sister raised her hand in a gesture of peace as they drew near the ranch house. "We seek shelter for the night," she said in clear English, her accent adding a musical quality to the words. "We mean no harm to you or your animals." Samuel studied them carefully, noting the exhaustion in their posture despite their proud bearing. Their moccasins were worn thin, and dust covered their clothing, suggesting they had traveled far. Most telling were their eyes, which held a deep sadness that spoke of recent loss. "My name is Ayana," the older sister continued, when Samuel remained silent. "This is my sister, Nalnish. We have been walking for 3 days." The younger sister, Nalnish, stepped slightly forward. Her English was less polished but equally determined. "Our village was attacked by soldiers. We are the only ones who escaped." The weight of their words settled over Samuel like a heavy blanket. He had heard rumors of military actions against Apache settlements, justified by reports of raids on supply wagons and attacks on isolated homesteads. But standing before these two young women, he found himself confronting the human cost of such conflicts. Samuel glanced toward his ranch house, then back at the sisters. Every instinct born from years on the frontier warned him against harboring Apache fugitives. His neighbors would not understand. The local sheriff might arrest him for aiding hostile Indians. Yet looking into their eyes, he saw not enemies, but two human beings in desperate need of help. "The barn," he said finally, nodding toward the large wooden structure near the corral. "You can rest there tonight. I'll bring you some food and water." Relief flickered across both sisters' faces, though they maintained their composed dignity. "We are grateful," Ayana said simply. As Samuel walked toward his house to gather supplies, his thoughts churned with conflicting emotions. He had lost friends to Apache raids over the years. His own brother had been killed in an attack on a wagon train 5 years earlier. Yet these women bore no resemblance to the savage warriors described in the territorial newspapers. Inside his modest kitchen, Samuel packed jerky, hardtack, and dried fruit into a cloth bundle. He filled a large canteen with fresh water from his well and added a pot of cold coffee left over from his evening meal. As he worked, he found himself thinking about his late wife, Margaret, who had died 3 years earlier from fever. She had always possessed a compassionate heart, often insisting they help travelers regardless of their background. When Samuel returned to the barn, he found the sisters sitting quietly in the hay, speaking to each other in their native language. Their voices were soft but urgent, and he caught fragments of what sounded like planning or preparation. Both women looked up as he entered, their expressions guarded but grateful. "Thank you," Ayanna said as he set down the bundle of food and water. "Your kindness will not be forgotten." Samuel nodded awkwardly, unsure of the proper response. "There's a stream about a quarter-mile east if you need to wash. But stay clear of the road. Sheriff's been through twice this week looking for—" He paused, realizing the sensitivity of his words. "Looking for us," Nulnish finished quietly. "We understand." As Samuel turned to leave, Ayanna spoke again. "May I ask your name?" "Samuel Thompson. This is my ranch." "Samuel Thompson," she repeated carefully. "We will remember your name with honor." Walking back to his house under the star-filled sky, Samuel felt the weight of his decision settling upon him. He had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed, offering sanctuary to fugitives who represented everything his neighbors feared. Yet something deep in his chest told him he had made the right choice. Inside his house, Samuel tried to focus on his evening routine, but his thoughts kept drifting to the barn where the two sisters rested. He found himself wondering about their story, about the village they claimed had been destroyed, about the lives they had lost. The territorial conflicts had always seemed distant and abstract to him, reduced to newspaper headlines and saloon gossip. Now, they had taken human form. As he prepared for bed, Samuel checked and rechecked his firearms, not out of fear of his guests but from awareness that harboring them put his ranch at risk. If soldiers or bounty hunters came looking for Apache fugitives, they might not be particular about who they considered complicit. The night sounds of the ranch settled around him as he finally lay down. Cattle lowed softly in the distance, night birds called from the creek, and somewhere in the darkness, two Apache sisters tried to find rest in his barn. Samuel stared at the ceiling, knowing that whatever happened next, this evening had already changed something fundamental in his understanding of the world around him. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and difficult decisions. But tonight, for the first time in months, Samuel Thompson felt that his actions had meaning beyond the daily struggle of ranch life. He had chosen compassion over fear, humanity over prejudice. Whether that choice would prove wise or foolish remained to be seen, but it was made, and he would face whatever consequences followed. The wind picked up outside, rustling the leaves of the cottonwoods by the creek. In the barn, two young women who had lost everything found temporary safety in the kindness of a stranger. And in the ranch house, a lonely widower discovered that even in the harsh landscape of the frontier, moments of grace could still illuminate the darkness. Dawn broke slowly over the Thompson ranch, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Samuel woke earlier than usual, his sleep having been restless and filled with fragmented dreams of burning villages and fleeing figures. The morning air carried the familiar sounds of his ranch awakening, but underneath lay intention that had not been there the day before. He dressed quickly and stepped onto his porch, scanning the landscape for any signs of approaching riders. The road that led to town remained empty, but Samuel knew that could change at any moment. Sheriff Morrison had been increasingly active in pursuing Apache fugitives, driven by pressure from territorial authorities and angry settlers demanding action. Moving quietly toward the barn, Samuel found the sisters already awake and preparing to leave. They had folded the blankets they had used and arranged the empty food containers neatly by the door. Both women looked refreshed despite their circumstances, their clothing brushed clean and their hair freshly braided. "You are leaving so soon?" Samuel asked, surprised by the disappointment in his own voice. Ayanna nodded gravely. "We have stayed too long already. Your kindness has given us rest, but we must not bring danger to your home." Nulnish stepped forward, holding out a small object wrapped in soft leather. "For your generosity," she said simply. Samuel unwrapped the leather to reveal a beautifully carved piece of turquoise shaped into the form of a soaring eagle. The craftsmanship was exquisite, with tiny details that must have taken hours to complete. The stone itself was a deep blue-green that seemed to hold the color of desert skies. "I cannot accept this," Samuel protested. You have so little. That is why you must take it, Ayana explained. Among our people, the most precious gifts are given when we have the least to spare. This belonged to our grandmother. She would want it to go to someone who showed kindness to her granddaughters. The weight of the gift in Samuel's palm felt heavier than the stone itself. He looked up at both sisters, seeing them clearly in the morning light. Ayana's face bore small scars that spoke of a hard life, but her eyes held wisdom beyond her years. Nalnish was younger but carried herself with the alertness of someone who had learned to survive in a dangerous world. "Where will you go?" Samuel asked. "North," Ayana replied. "We have relatives among the Mescalero. If we can reach their territory, we will be safe. That's more than 100 miles through hostile country." "We are Apache," Nalnish said with quiet pride. "The land does not frighten us. It is the men with guns we must avoid." Samuel's mind worked rapidly. The route north would take them through several towns, and across open country where they would be visible to any patrols. 2 Apache women traveling alone would be arrested immediately. Or worse, the recent tensions had made even peaceful encounters potentially fatal. "Wait here," he said suddenly, turning toward his house. Inside, Samuel moved with purpose, gathering supplies and considering options he had never imagined contemplating. From his kitchen, he took additional food that would travel well. From his bedroom, he retrieved his late wife's spare clothing and a worn but serviceable travel bag. Most importantly, he took a folded paper from his desk drawer, a letter of safe passage he had received years earlier for helping a territorial official recover stolen cattle. When he returned to the barn, the sisters watched him with curious expressions. "I have a better idea than sending you into the wilderness alone," Samuel said. "My neighbor Jake Martinez has a freight wagon heading to Santa Fe next week. He owes me a favor, and he's one of the few men in these parts who judges people by their actions rather than their bloodline." Ayana shook her head firmly. "We cannot ask you to do more. You have already risked much. You're not asking, I'm offering." Samuel held up Margaret's clothes. "These belong to my wife. You're about her size. With different clothes and this letter, you might pass as Mexican women traveling with a freight company." The sisters exchanged a rapid conversation in Apache, their voices intense but quiet. Samuel caught the cadence of disagreement, with Nalnish apparently arguing for accepting the help, while Ayana expressed concern about the additional risk to Samuel. "Your sister is right to worry," Samuel said, surprising them by understanding the nature if not the words of their discussion. "But I'm not making this offer lightly. In 3 years since my wife died, I've lived like a man already dead. Yesterday, helping you, I felt alive again." Ayana studied his face carefully. "Why? We are strangers. We are Apache. Your people and mine have shed much blood." Samuel considered her question seriously. "Because you needed help, and I was able to give it. Because you trusted me enough to ask for shelter instead of trying to take it. Because my wife would have done the same thing. And I want to honor her memory." The simplicity of his answer seemed to surprise both sisters. In their world, actions often carried complex motivations, involving honor, revenge, survival, or tribal politics. Pure human compassion had become so rare in their experience that they struggled to accept it at face value. "There is more," Samuel continued. "Yesterday you told me soldiers attacked your village. Today I want to know what really happened." Nalnish's face darkened. "Blue coats came at dawn. They said we were harboring raiders. But our village was peaceful. We grew corn and raised horses. We traded with Mexican merchants and bothered no one. The soldiers burned everything," Ayana added, her voice steady despite the pain in her eyes. "Our grandfather tried to explain that we were not hostile, that we lived in peace. They shot him while he held a white cloth." Samuel felt a cold anger building in his chest. He had heard the official version of the raid in town, described as a successful action against a hostile Apache stronghold. No mention had been made of civilians or peaceful intentions. How many survived? 4 others escaped into the mountains, but they went east, toward the old country. We chose the northern path, and you've been walking for 3 days with nothing but what you could carry. Both sisters nodded. The full scope of their loss began to register with Samuel. Not just their homes and possessions, but their entire way of life had been destroyed in a single morning. Everything they had known, everyone they had loved, was gone. Jake Martinez leaves for Santa Fe on Thursday, Samuel said after a moment. That gives us 4 days to prepare. You'll stay here until then. We cannot, Ayanna protested. The risk to you is too great. The risk to you is greater. And I've made up my mind. Samuel's tone carried a finality that surprised even him. He had not realized how much his decision meant to him until he heard himself state it so firmly. For the first time since Margaret's death, he felt connected to something larger than his daily routine of ranch work and solitary meals. The sisters looked at each other again, communicating in the wordless way of people who had shared danger and loss. Finally, Ayanna nodded slowly. We accept your offer, but we will work for our keep. Apache women are not helpless. There's plenty to do around here, Samuel agreed. But first, let's see how you look in those clothes. As the sisters examined Margaret's clothing, Samuel found himself studying them with new eyes. Not as Apache fugitives or potential threats, but as individuals with their own stories, skills, and dreams. Ayanna moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to leadership, while Nalnish possessed an alertness that suggested natural intelligence and quick thinking. Over the following hours, as they worked together to prepare for the disguise that might save the sisters' lives, Samuel began to understand that his evening with 2 Apache women had become something far more significant. He was not just offering temporary shelter but choosing to actively resist a system that reduced human beings to categories of friend or enemy based on their heritage. The transformation began immediately. Margaret's clothes fit reasonably well with some adjustments. Ayanna's hair, unbraided and arranged in a Mexican style, changed her appearance dramatically. Nalnish required more work, her younger features and distinctive bearing marking her as clearly Native American despite the clothing change. We will need to practice speaking only Spanish around others, Ayanna noted, switching easily between languages. And we must learn to move differently, less like warriors and more like civilians. Samuel watched them adapt with growing admiration. Their intelligence and resourcefulness became more apparent as they worked through the challenges of their disguise. These were not the savage enemies described in newspaper stories, but sophisticated individuals capable of complex planning and cultural adaptation. As the day progressed, Samuel found himself learning as much as he was teaching. The sisters shared knowledge of the land that he had never acquired despite years of ranching. They identified plants he had never noticed, predicted weather changes from subtle signs, and demonstrated an understanding of animal behavior that amazed him. By evening, a remarkable transformation had taken place, not just in the sisters' appearance, but in the atmosphere of the ranch itself. For the first time in years, Samuel's property felt alive, with purpose beyond mere survival. Conversation filled the spaces where only silence had existed before. Laughter, rare and precious, echoed from the barn, where the sisters practiced their new roles. As darkness fell, Samuel realized that regardless of what happened with Jake Martinez's wagon or their journey to Santa Fe, his life had already been permanently altered. The lonely widower who had offered shelter to 2 strangers was discovering that compassion, once awakened, transforms not just its recipients, but its giver as well. Thursday morning arrived with an unseasonably cool breeze that carried the scent of distant rain. Samuel stood in his kitchen, packing the last of the supplies he had gathered for the sisters' journey. 4 days of preparation had transformed 2 Apache fugitives into credible Mexican travelers, but more importantly, it had transformed Samuel himself in ways he was only beginning to understand. The sound of approaching wagon wheels announced Jake Martinez's arrival before Samuel could see the dust cloud on the horizon. His neighbor's freight wagon was exactly on time, as Jake's reputation for reliability demanded. Samuel felt his stomach tighten with nervous energy as the moment of truth approached. Ayanna and Nalnish emerged from the barn dressed in Margaret's carefully altered clothing. Their hair arranged in Mexican fashion, and their bearing practiced to suggest weary but determined travelers. The transformation was remarkable. But Samuel knew that close scrutiny could still expose them. Everything depended on Jake's willingness to help, and his ability to maintain the deception, if questioned by authorities. Jake Martinez had been Samuel's neighbor for 8 years, a weathered Mexican-American freight hauler whose reputation for honest dealing extended throughout the territory. His wagon carried goods between isolated ranches and territorial towns, making him one of the few men who could travel freely without arousing suspicion from either Apache warriors or territorial patrols. "Buenos dias, Samuel," Jake called, as he brought his wagon to a halt near the ranch house. "You said you had passengers for Santa Fe?" Samuel walked toward the wagon, gesturing for the sisters to remain by the barn until he had spoken with Jake privately. The freight hauler studied Samuel's face with the sharp eyes of a man accustomed to reading people quickly and accurately. "Jake, I need to ask you for something that goes beyond the favor you owe me," Samuel began carefully. "These women are running from something that wasn't their fault. They need safe passage north, and they need someone who won't ask too many questions." Jake's expression grew serious. In the frontier, requests for "no questions asked" usually involved law trouble, claim jumping, or worse. But he had known Samuel for years and trusted the rancher's judgment. "How much trouble are we talking about?" Jake asked quietly. "The kind that could get us all shot if we're caught helping," Samuel replied honestly. "But the kind that any decent man would help with if he knew the whole story." Jake studied the two women waiting by the barn, taking in their appearance and bearing with an experienced eye. After a long moment, he nodded slowly. "I was planning to stop overnight in Las Cruces anyway. From there they can find their own way north. But Samuel, if this goes bad, I've got a family to think about." "I understand, and I'm grateful." Samuel waved the sisters forward, and they approached the wagon with the measured steps they had practiced. Ayanna carried a small bundle of belongings, while Nalnish held the travel bag Samuel had provided. Both women kept their eyes appropriately downcast, playing their roles as traveling Mexican women seeking passage to rejoin relatives. "Señor Martinez," Ayanna said in careful Spanish, "we are grateful for your kindness in allowing us to travel with your wagon." Jake's eyes sharpened slightly at her accent, but he nodded politely. "The journey will be long and dusty. You will need to help with the camp work each evening." "Sí, señor, we understand." As the sisters climbed into the back of the wagon, settling themselves among the freight goods, Samuel felt a profound sense of loss, mixed with satisfaction. 4 days had passed like a lifetime, filled with conversations that had expanded his understanding of the world and challenged assumptions he had never thought to question. "Samuel," Ayanna called softly as Jake prepared to depart. "May I speak with you once more?" Samuel approached the wagon, and Ayanna leaned closer, speaking in English but keeping her voice low enough that Jake could not hear clearly. "What you have done for us goes beyond kindness. You have risked everything for strangers. Among our people, such actions create bonds that last forever. You will always have family among the Apache, no matter where we go." Nalnish added her own words, switching to Spanish for Jake's benefit. "Que Dios le bendiga, señor. Your wife would be proud." The mention of Margaret hit Samuel unexpectedly hard. For a moment, he felt her presence almost tangibly, as if she stood beside him, approving of his choices. The sisters had somehow intuited what he had been unable to articulate even to himself, that helping them was a way of honoring his wife's memory and the values she had embodied. "Travel safely," he said simply, stepping back as Jake clicked to his horses. The wagon began to roll forward, carrying its precious cargo toward an uncertain future. Samuel stood watching until it disappeared over the rise that led toward the main road, feeling simultaneously empty and fulfilled. His ranch seemed impossibly quiet after 4 days of conversation and shared purpose. Over the following weeks, Samuel found himself changed in fundamental ways. The daily routine of ranch work continued, but it no longer felt like mere survival. Every task carried the memory of lessons learned from the sisters about finding meaning in simple actions, about maintaining dignity in the face of loss, about the courage required to trust strangers. News eventually reached the territory that 2 Apache women had successfully joined relatives among the Mescalero, disappearing into the northern mountains beyond the reach of territorial authorities. No names were mentioned in the reports, but Samuel knew with quiet certainty that Ayanna and Nalnish had found safety. The carved turquoise eagle they had given him found a place of honor on his mantle, where it caught the light from the fireplace each evening. Sometimes, as he sat in his chair after a long day's work, Samuel would study the intricate carving and remember the faces of two remarkable women who had trusted him with their lives. Jake Martinez never spoke directly about his passengers, but his occasional visits to the ranch carried a new warmth and respect. The freight hauler had seen how the sisters conducted themselves during the journey and had drawn his own conclusions about their character and Samuel's judgment. More significantly, word spread quietly through the network of decent men throughout the territory that Samuel Thompson's ranch was a place where justice sometimes mattered more than law, where humanity could trump politics. Other travelers began to appear at his door. Not all of them Apache, not all of them fugitives, but all of them in need of the kind of help that required no questions and left no official records. Samuel discovered that his evening with two Apache sisters had awakened something in him that refused to go back to sleep. The lonely widower had become someone else entirely. A man who understood that true security came not from isolation but from connection to something larger than himself. As autumn deepened and the first snows appeared on the distant mountains, Samuel often found himself thinking about the village that had been destroyed, the lives that had been lost, and the two young women who had survived to carry their people's memory forward. The territorial conflicts continued, marked by occasional outbreaks of violence and retaliation. But they no longer seemed like distant abstractions to him. On quiet evenings, as he sat by his fire with the turquoise eagle catching the light, Samuel understood that his life had been divided into two distinct parts: the time before two Apache sisters had walked out of the cottonwoods seeking shelter, and everything that had followed. The first part had been about survival, building walls, protecting what was his. The second part was about something harder to define but infinitely more meaningful. The rancher who had offered shelter to strangers had discovered that compassion, once awakened, changes not just individual lives but the very fabric of the world around it. In helping Ayanna and Nalnish reach safety, Samuel had found his own path back to the land of the living. Years later, when territorial tensions had evolved into different forms and new challenges faced the frontier, Samuel Thompson would be remembered not as a successful rancher or a man who had built prosperity from nothing, but as someone who had chosen humanity over fear when it mattered most. The evening that had begun with two desperate women seeking shelter had become the foundation for a life lived in service to something greater than personal comfort or safety. The turquoise eagle remained on his mantle, a permanent reminder that some encounters change us so completely that we can never return to who we were before. And in the quiet moments before sleep, Samuel often whispered a prayer of gratitude for the night when two Apache sisters had trusted him with their lives and, in doing so, had given him back his own.